Hello, and in this video we will learn how to architecture well your PHP project. I know that sometimes when you just start a new project, you don't really know how to build well and properly your PHP project because you get a bit confused. You don't know what kind of folders where all the folders should sit all together, and sometimes it can be a bit complicated. Sometimes we use an architecture of a framework. Like Laravel is not really that flexible and you have to follow always the same pattern. Even if you want to build your architecture in a different way, it's harder. But at the same time, it's nice because it's a standard. And so for new devs that join your project, it's easier to understand all the folders because they already know, oh, the controllers will be there. I don't know, the client side will be there. All the functions, the helpers will be there. For the components, it will sit there. For, I don't know, for the endpoints, for the router, I know all the routers will be in that part. The services will be, all the services will be in that part. All the unit tests will be in that folder, and so on. And that way, it helps as well. I know that in some projects, you have all the tests, all the unit tests in the root directory. You have a test folder, and then you have the same architecture as the source folder, but in the test folder. So, for instance, you want to test your, I don't know if they mentioned here in the article I just found for you, but I don't think so. Oh, here are the tests. You see, all the tests are in the same root folder. And when you go to SRC folder, you will have all the source where most of the dev work. And if you want to test product, so SRC product, if you want to test product category.php, you will create a test in the test folder, that one. In the test folder, you will create a folder called product and then a file name called product category test with a suffix test.php. But in some different projects, like now I'm working with an Express API, express.js API, and it's a little bit different because for them, in every the architecture is quite different, and for them, for instance, in product they will have double underscore tests, and that's the folder. Actually, it's underscore test underscore. So it's really like this, underscore test underscore. You see? I don't know if I can create a note. So to show you also some notes, that will be handy in a sec. Okay. My computer is new, as you can see. So yeah, you would have a folder like this. You see? So that's handy. It really depends of what you wish. Having a test folder in the root directory is a way to go with PHP because PHP unit works that way. When you use Mocha, Sinon, it's a little bit different with Sinon, but for PHP unit, it's that way. And it's a good architecture. And public will be just the index public file. Source, it will be everything about private files, services, and so on. Sometimes the domain files and controllers whatsoever. Templates or views will be the view of the template. Resources will be other resources. Sometimes the name is assets. It depends. And then, yeah, you see that here he shows as well with the domain folder. It's a good article, actually, this one. So the name of the website is, I will paste it so you can maybe see it. Oops, sorry. So that's the name. Oops, wow, it's a long, the URL is not really, oh yeah, actually it's shorter. That's the URL. It's a 2017 blog post, but it's still good. And I will show you. So that's the architecture, the example of an architecture you can use. I kind of like the idea behind it because I use exactly the same what he says here in this article. So that's why I'm showing to you this one. And here you have, yeah, the cache folder, the domain, and the domain, like what he explains, you have again cart, product, user. Is, you know, everything is a bit different. It really depends of your project, of with who you work, and it's nice to be consistent, however. So if you with every developer working on in the same project, they have to be very consistent. And if you're a product manager or lead developer, you really have to take care and to make sure that every dev use the same architecture for every project of the company. Otherwise, it will be harder also for a dev to jump to another product in the same company. So that's also really, really important. That's the domain specification of a project. I will show you actually, in my case, that's one project I built a while ago, and I show you that one because the architecture, I did my best to build it under a different architecture, and it's actually action domain responder. What we were talking actually here with the domain, but here you have the domain, so it's not MVC, it's you have the action, the domain, all the logic and everything, and then responder is like the response. So SRC, you have core is everything about, you know, you can have services and so on. Action is just the action. It's like, you know, in a controller file, you have a lot of actions. Here, it's one file per action and not one controller file and then all actions in the same file. The difference is that you have way more files because for every action you have one file, but it's really good because it's much easier to test because you won't test the whole controller, but you will test every action at once. So you will have one action file for each action, and it's easier to debug. It's easier to maintain, at least for me. And in the action folder, you can have a lot of different subfolders with different parts of action. So you can have user, you can have profile, photos, and so on. Otherwise, you can jump to a microservices architecture as well, but it's not. We won't talk about it in this video. I will show you actually about action domain responder. That's a really good architecture actually that I really suggest you. It's yeah, it's a really good idea. It's really smooth, and to me, so I will show you because for some people it's a bit confusing. So what a domain is, because I know the name is a bit like, oh wow, what does it mean? It's that DDD architecture. I don't know if you know the DDD architecture. We can jump about it right now, otherwise we'll forget. It's domain-driven design, and it's also sometimes a lot of people get confused with that design. So for here, for the domain, let's see if Wikipedia will give a better explanation that I would give. Receive the information from the action. Yes. The behavior, do they say the logic, or it's all the code actually. Domain hotspot and responder. The domain can modify safe interaction. Yeah, there are not much. I found a really good article as well for specifically for PHP, where it was handlers. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, he did the Mongo Laravel plugin as well. Mongo Laravel. Let's see first if we can. Oh, that's the author. That's the name of him. And let's see if I go here. Oh, actually, there are not a lot of new posts. So normally I should. Oh yeah, here is. It's that article. It's a really good one, and he speaks also about action domain responder, but also about a simpler way where you just have basically the handler response, the request handler, sorry. And so here you will have, you have update user handler, and you invoke each time because actually you don't, I mean, it's like it's a function. So it's the same for an action. Here I probably did the same. It's like the action is like a function. Do I invoke somewhere? Let's see if I do. Well, I don't see here, but it's quite good. Oh, here he mentions as well that for testing, it's don't create other dependencies because of request handler, and that's why it's really good, this approach for testing as well. Happen not usually file request handler is such a great improvement over the huge controller test. And yeah, it is actually not specific of them. You see, so that's why by testing an action or a response handler, it makes your job much easier. And yeah, single responsibility definitely, because when you have a controller, your controller unfortunately does much more than just one thing. One controller will have so many different things, but if you have just an action per file, it will be single responsibility. Single responsibilities from the solid pattern, which is S for single responsibility, O for open and close principle, or L for Liskov substitution principle, O I for interface segregation interface. But I invite you to have a look on those principle segregation principle, and D for dependency inversion. But the single responsibility is a really good one. So yeah, I suggest you to have a look to this one, and to know it's so easy because you use class, so that's like a function, so that's why you need invoke here. And so you would use that handler, and really simply. So I really suggest you to have a look to the request handler. It's much simpler than the action domain and domain action responder. And another architecture I want to explain to you is a more traditional one. Here I'm in a project for Opulence PHP, and they have all the tests here. And inside of the source project, it looks a bit like a Laravel project actually. You have application, you have the bootstrappers, that's a bit different actually. That's from the framework, sorry. You have the domain, there is no domain yet. Oh yeah, no, the bootstrappers is actually all the packages we need for that project. Let me have a look because I'm not that familiar yet. It's all the bootstrapper actually. It's not from the framework. It's just a bootstrapper you need to, if you need to change. And then you have the application, and in console is if you do a CLI application. And then you have HTTP if when you do an HTTP request or whatsoever, like for an API, for an endpoint, it will be here. And you will have as well the routers, which is in HTTP folder, but in the config. So you have application, HTTP, and then the controllers. That's, I mean, here's the test. So HTTP controllers, and you have middleware and the view. And in inside of the main root folder, you have config, and then you have like the environment variables, application settings, and you have the where it is, you have you have an HTTP folder, and there you have all the different routes you can use. So yeah, it's really up to you. Now it's really important to have a good architecture for your project. That's definitely very important, because it will be so crucial later on when your application will become bigger and bigger. So if you are more in a monolith architecture or a microservice architecture or a modular architecture, nowadays people will like microservice architecture, but monolithic is good too. But it's harder when your project becomes much bigger. Then it's much easier to move to microservices, because it's much more agile and much more flexible than monolithic architecture. That's it for today. Good luck on your architecture of your next project. And yeah, just before to finish, like all projects you will see, all open source projects are different. Sometimes you have just services, and then you have persistence, and you would have models for the database, and then a template folder as well. It's always different. Don't get scared. Sometimes it's the same actually principle. It's the same. It's still MVC, or maybe it's a different kind of architecture, but it ends always by the same. Even if it's a ADR architecture, action domain responder, it's really good, but you can have different, just for ADR or for a MVC architecture, the way how all the folders are organized can be very different. Like in Laravel, for instance, you have also the HTTP folder, then you have controllers, and you have a lot of different folders to end up in the controllers. In different applications, it's a little bit different. I will show you my CMS, which the name is PH7 CMS, and here I have a protected folder where that folder should be outside of the public root of the server, so it should be, it's like protected as the name says. Framework is the framework of the homemade framework. It's an old framework. I mean, it's an old CMS. I started in 2009, and obviously now if I had to do it again, I would split everything into different separated packages, composer packages. But if you go to app, and then system is at the system apps, the native ones, and they're not removable. You have a lot of modules, and then here you see you have controllers, you have the language folder, you have the models, and you have the view and the config folder. It's also a good way to design your different modules. Although now I would have everything separated into different packages with packages. But when I started in 2009, even Composer didn't really exist with PHP. And the last project I want to show you is Flarom, because I think they are very interesting for the architecture too, because they use a lot of different Composer packages. So you have the core one, and then you see everything is split into very small Composer packages. Everything, literally. If you go here, that's a core one, but I think they have the base. Yeah, I mean, base and core, it's a bit confusing because it means more or less the same. Oh no, Flarom. So Flarom, that's the base one. I mean, the empty shell, where the composer, the JSON will require all the other Flarom packages, the ones that they need. And in my case, for my CMS, for instance, I would, if I had to do it again in nowadays in 2021, I would do that way, and to require every package like this instead of having everything as a monolithic architecture. So yeah, think about it twice, because after it will be too late. Once your application is already on the advanced stage, it's much harder to resplit into a completely different architecture, and it will create a lot of bugs as well. So good luck on it. When you start a new project, either you use the basic architecture of the framework if you use the framework, that's what the framework suggests you to do, which I suggest you to follow the architecture of the framework, because it's much easier later on to debug or to hire people. But if you use your homemade solution or just a simple PHP application made by you with some composer packages, I suggest you to think twice before for the architecture. Draw something as a draft and try to have a nice, easy to understand architecture. So